Since its opening, the Stanley Hotel has loomed ominously over the small mountain town of Estes Park, Colorado, harboring dark secrets within its creaking wooden halls. Founded in 1909 by Freeland Stanley, who was stricken with tuberculosis, the hotel bearing his namesake would draw visitors from around the country to its romantic and seemingly serene location perched high in the Rocky Mountains for years following its opening. As the hotel grew in popularity, so did its reputation, and it wouldn't take long before strange tales of odd sightings and unexplainable encounters began to circulate among guests and employees with first-hand experience in the hotel. Stories of strange noises, lights flickering on and off, and even unexpected visitors in the night who sat, watching guests as they lay sleeping, would become commonplace, many of which such tales persist to this day. But it begs the question, just what exactly are these strange and often ominous experiences, or, perhaps even more disturbingly, who could be the cause of these encounters? Stay with us through today's video as we take a look at and try to understand for ourselves the mysterious history of the Stanley Hotel's spectral ghosts. Viewer discretion is advised. When Freeland Stanley and his wife Flora arrived in Estes Valley in 1903, they were awestruck by the massive nature of the ancient Ute and Arapaho homelands that stretched from the barren 14,000-foot peaks to the dark, low river valleys where French and Spanish fur trappers had roamed the previous decades. Stanley was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. After a troublesome journey to get here, he had finally arrived, and now he was one step away from his final goal, to die in a beautiful place. Having been diagnosed with the incurable disease of tuberculosis, Stanley had made it his goal to get to Colorado, where the air was drier, and where it was said a man could die on God's doorstep in the sacred lands of the local native tribes. As summer came and went, though, something odd happened. Stanley didn't die. In fact, he seemed to be improving. Stanley made a full recovery by the end of the year, and by his own words credited the fresh air and sunshine for his health, though doctors had no explanation for how a recovery of this degree could ever have been possible. Having now recovered, Stanley decided he needed to share the amazing healing powers of this land with others, which is why in 1909, he officially opened the Stanley Hotel. For decades, guests marveled at the elaborate winding halls and modern amenities of the hotel, which included running water, electricity, and even a full-service kitchen service, all the while being surrounded by utter wilderness on all sides. Despite the posh face of the hotel, there seemed to be an ever-present darkness looming over the property, as even early guests to the hotel would confirm that there was something oddly malevolent about the property. These tales would gain more attention when, in 1911, the head chambermaid Elizabeth Wilson entered the hotel's room 217 with a lit candle, unaware of a gas leak coming from a lantern that Stanley himself had installed in the room. In an instant, a massive explosion set ablaze nearly 10% of the entire hotel, and Wilson, though alive, was knocked into a deep coma. Waking up nearly 2 years later, Wilson miraculously returned to work at the Stanley in full health and would continue her duties until 1950 when she retired. By all means, this should have been the end of Wilson's story, but it wasn't. Some 20-plus years later in 1974, while world-renowned writer Stephen King stayed the night at the Stanley in the infamous room 217 itself, he would awake in a cold sweat, his sheets soaked with sweat. In his dream, he had seen his son being chased down the hallway by a fiery horse, screaming as he looked back over his shoulder at its horrendous figure. Quickly jotting down what he had just experienced in his vision the night before, his overnight at the hotel would eventually become the basis for his book, The Shining. Many have speculated on the meaning of King's vivid nightmare, but it's difficult to ignore the connection between the image of the flaming horse and the 1911 explosion in the very room in which he slept that night. It comes as no surprise as well to learn that to this day, guests in room 217 report an oddly tidy room greeting them upon their awakening, or even more disturbingly for unmarried couples, a chilling presence settling into the bed between them under the sheets at night. Despite a relatively tame run of events for the decades following the explosion, there was still much to be wary of in the Stanley. Alongside the ever-present unease guests would report were two bizarre elements: an on-site pet cemetery, and a series of complex underground tunnels that wove throughout the hotel. The cemetery itself is said to often be chilled, and upon visiting, guests have reported an odd feeling of lethargy. This is to say nothing about the reports of guests who swear they hear scratching like a dog's claws on their door at night, only to open it to see an old newspaper, folded and placed on the floor, right outside their room. The tunnels have been an odd addition since the opening of the Stanley, further complicated by their intended use as a passageway for servants and employees to make their way around the hotel unseen. It's odd then that some of these tunnels run on for yards in total darkness, only to terminate into a wall with no clear entrance or exit. Some of these dead ends have been reported to have changed positions over the years too, with early guests and builders reporting strange trapdoors leading into the tunnels, appearing and disappearing at seemingly random access points throughout the building. Once inside the tunnels, one can occasionally catch a faint smell of sugar and bread, supposedly the lure of the ghost of a chef once employed by the hotel, who may have become trapped within the tunnels somewhere in their depths. But if the cemetery and the underground tunnels aren't creepy enough, the fourth floor as a whole is said to have drawn the most intense hauntings within the hotel. Patrons and employees who frequent this part of the establishment have commented on the feeling of pure dread in and around the extended hallways, common areas, and more specifically several of the rooms on this level. Guests on the fourth floor have collectively said to hear the haunting sounds of children's laughter as they race up and down the halls, only to find the common areas completely abandoned upon opening their room door. Most of these encounters seem to be isolated to the hallways and common areas outside of the most terrifying rooms though. Guests staying in room 428 have reported some of the less frightening, though still disturbing occurrences on the fourth floor. Many patrons have described a feeling of being watched as they doze off, only to see a tall figure in a cowboy hat leaning over them. Upon investigation, the strange figure can be seen sitting in the corner of the room, watching the guests patiently before dissolving into thin air. Room 428 guests have also often been critical of the noise of footsteps, which seem to come from the floor above the room, despite no rooms existing above this area. In another part of floor 4, room 407 guests claim to have experienced a soft pair of hands gently tucking them in at night, and an aura of comfort gently washing over them, before an oddly heavy weight settles onto the edge of the bed. As a feeling of sudden dread strikes the guests, a glance towards the foot of the bed reveals nothing but an indentation in the bed sheets. But room 401 poses perhaps the strangest and most disturbing occurrences on the property. A male figure sometimes manifests within the room, visible only as a shadowy figure for a moment before vanishing. Multiple women claim to have experienced an icy cold touch, only to spin around and find nobody there. Several female employees over the years claimed to have fallen mysteriously ill in and around this room as well. Male guests too seem to draw the wrath of this being, as there have been reports of wedding bands moving instantaneously from one side of the room to the other, or falling off the fingers of their owners while they lounged about the room. All these signs point to some sort of dark and malevolent force in room 401. That could just be the beginning of things far more sinister to come. The true horror of these fourth floor entities is their hard-to-explain nature. There seems to be a clear, albeit mysterious, agenda and theme to their actions. Yet simultaneously, it seems anyone entering this area of the Stanley for any reason is at risk of falling victim to their acts. Despite several investigations into the fourth floor, even the leading paranormal investigators in the nation have yet to produce a definitive answer for just what exactly seems to be plaguing this floor. After finally passing in 1940 at the age of 91, 37 years after his tuberculosis should have seen him put in the ground, Stanley's presence is said to have joined with his hotel in the afterlife. Guests have witnessed his ethereal form having drinks at the bar late in the evening, while the hotel sits silent. Sometimes faint laughter can be heard from the billiard room, before Mr. Stanley's spectral visage is seen exiting into the adjoining hall. Flora, his wife, can also be heard joining him as she plays despairing tunes on the hotel's piano. Many suspect that the pair have been joined in eternity thanks to their hotel, which perhaps imprisons them within its walls. Since its opening, many have wondered what has caused these strange events to occur within the Stanley. Located high in the Estes Valley, where some now suggest ancient native burial grounds exist, this location might account for a variety of the peculiar incidents, such as Stanley's extended lifespan and the fourth-floor entities, possibly intent on intimidating trespassers on this now defiled land. Yet still are theories that Stanley himself designed the hotel bearing his name to be a conduit for some type of ritual or process that granted him vigor, but also demanded a sacrifice of living creatures as payment. Many leading experts in the paranormal field agree that these possibilities are entirely plausible, yet a far darker and more disturbing theory still exists. For the decades leading up to Stanley's arrival in the Estes Valley, French trappers had reported legends coming out of the region of rich lands, ripe with beautiful country, untainted by the hand of European man. The natives in this area also warned, however, of an ancient curse that was said to plague the lands of this region of the United States. Supposedly a cursed man-killing beast, fueled by the insatiable lust for blood, was said to emerge in the winter to stalk and consume its prey. Perhaps it is this creature that plagued the property, cursing it and dooming it to its horrific fate. Or perhaps the source of the Stanleys' disturbing haunts can't be traced to just one of these theories, but multiple. The mysteries surrounding the Stanley Hotel persist to this day, fueling speculation just as it has throughout the rest of its obscure history. Despite past and ongoing efforts of paranormal investigators and psychics alike, the truth remains elusive, shrouded in the dark aura of the building's history. Yet, it is precisely this mysterious nature that perpetuates the fascination with the Stanley, having now become a mainstay of the Estes Valley's folklore. As guests continue to occupy its halls and drift to sleep in its luxurious rooms, the Stanley Hotel remains alive, both in its operation and in its tradition. No matter the cause of the haunts of the Stanley Hotel, one thing that can't be denied is that if you decide to book a night inside the pearl-white walls of the Stanley, you won't be sleeping alone. What do you think is really behind the hauntings of the Stanley Hotel? Let us know in the comments, and for more true stories of terrifying haunts, check out our video on Eastern State Penitentiary by clicking here.